Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today on our panel on public-private partnerships. My name is Sarah Hess. I'm the West Coast Director of Silicon Valley Defense Group, also an investor operator at Lux Capital. Previously within the CIA, helped launch the NATO Innovation Fund and the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. And I am joined here today by three lovely panelists. I'd like you to go down the line and introduce yourselves, if that's okay.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Larsen Jensen. I'm the founder of Harpoon Venture Capital, an early stage venture capital firm that invests in dual use technologies. Prior to that, I worked at a couple of bulge bracket venture capital firms in Silicon Valley, went to Stanford with a lot of my fellow panelists here. And prior to that was in the SEAL teams. So serving my country is a priority to me. And I think that by virtue of what we're doing here, by investing in enabling technologies that are critical to national security, we have the opportunity to do that and to continue to support my colleagues who are continuing to wear the uniform, but do it from a private sector standpoint.
Well, it's hard to follow an Olympian Navy SEAL, and Sarah, your amazing background, but I'll do my best. My name is Andy Yakulis. I run strategic engagement for the Office of Strategic Capital, as well as Army Investments. Prior to that, I worked at the Army Applications Lab, which is the Army's innovation arm here in Austin, Texas. And then my background in the Army, which I'm still active duty, is as an operational commander and helicopter pilot. Spent about 8 years in special operations.
I'm Brandon Levitan. I'm a director at Madison Dearborn Partners, where I'm on what's called our technology and government team. And I focus on our investments in the defense and government ecosystem. And also hard to follow Larsen's background, like all of us. But I started my career in investment banking, where I worked across a number of industries, but really kind of majored in what you call aerospace and defense. And have been in Madison Dearborn Partners for about 10 years. And throughout my time at the firm, have really focused on this industry. And very glad to be here. It's an exciting time in defense technology and the broader ecosystem. And it's this topic is one of the major, really exciting topics driving, the excitement. So it's great to be here.
And most importantly of all, we are all Stanford alums. So go Cardinal.
Yes.
So Andy, I'm going to start with you. The Office of Strategic Capital today released their first ever investment strategy. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that and then also explain what gap the OSC is trying to fill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So we're really excited today from the Office of Strategic Capital to announce the release of our first ever, and really the Department of Defense first ever investment strategy. We're very excited to do that here from Austin, Texas. OSC was established about 15 months ago in December of 2022. So we're one of the newest organizations in the Department of Defense. And when the Secretary of Defense established OSC, he asked us to do two things. The first was to create a governance board, which we did, and we hold regular meetings with our governance board. But the second was to write this investment strategy. And in the strategy, he really wanted to make sure, one, we provided a roadmap for the office to make sure private investors understood how to work with OSC, and how to partner with us. But also, he wanted to make sure that we are prioritizing technology areas. And in the strategy, if you read it, it'll walk you through what OSC is, why we exist, what gaps we're trying to fill. And then we prioritize different technology areas that we're really trying to invite investors to invest alongside of us with. So OSC's mission is to attract and scale private capital for national security. And we're very complementary to other organizations that exist in the Department of Defense. There's a lot of really great, fantastic innovation organizations. A lot of them are here in Texas. I used to work for one at the Army Applications Lab. But where we sit is different. We are not issuing contracts or grants. Rather, we're using debt-based tools, loans, and loan guarantees to invite and empower investors to, again, invest in those critical technologies for national security. And those are the gaps we're trying to fill. There's a lot of effort that has gone into very downstream technologies, but where OSC sits is to invest in enabling or critical technologies that go into those capabilities that you'll see go into the hands of the warfighter.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Larsen, Harpoon is an early stage venture firm that's investing in a number of deep technologies, including space, biotech, cybersecurity. Why did you choose to invest in these areas, and how do you see these companies interacting with the government?
I think it goes back to our founding story and our founding premise. And a couple things were happening about a half a dozen years ago, Sarah. The first of which was a transition from our adversaries in the Middle East to great power competition. But I also observed that the history of Silicon Valley was really born out of collaboration with Uncle Sam and the government. Back in those formative years, the private capital ecosystem wasn't evolved or sophisticated enough to ultimately capitalize large, audacious, ambitious tasks, like creating the GPS that we now benefit from today, creating rockets that go to the moon or go into space, to creating the internet. So if you were a very talented engineer back in the day in Silicon Valley, the only opportunity that you really had to do something that was audacious and required a lot of capital was to work in a government-funded program. That's subsequently changed quite a bit. And now the private capital ecosystem has evolved to such a point where you can actually go out there and raise a few $100 million from firms like yours, not necessarily firms like mine, we're relatively small, but to go out there and accomplish something super audacious. So what I thought was missing, however, was this intersection of both. And what we're here to talk about today is this opportunity for the private capital ecosystem to complement the public capital ecosystem to foster innovation here domestically and to move us forward as a country and to maintain our technological edge and our prowess as the United States of America. I'm very confident that we're going to be doing that, but it is a different ecosystem where, again, it started with the government really sponsoring these technologies and funding them, moved to be very pure play commercial. And I think we're getting back into this paradigm where there is a best of both worlds approach to help us do things better, faster, and more efficient with capital than we've ever done before. So these theme areas that we have invested in are critical to national security. And that's why we think that they're really important.
Yeah.
We also think that beyond national security, there's an economic component to it as well that will help maintain the United States as the tentpole technology provider for the entire globe.
Yeah. How do you see your company is interacting with the commercial sector versus the government? How is the government a different type of customer?
I'm really curious to hear your perspective on this as well. So I'll turn it back to you in a moment. But generally speaking, we see the government market as an expansion opportunity. There's certainly exceptions. There's times where through regulation and through a variety of other reasons, the commercial market can be a laggard. Areas like autonomy, where the DARPA Grand Challenge really set the stage for autonomous development before the regulations evolved and were appropriate for self-driving on the road or self-flying with working through the FAA. So in situations like that, I think the government is a great first customer or first funder.
Yep.
But in most situations, the government provides, relatively slow feedback loops. The quantum of capital they operate under is rather large. But you need to be more patient as a company and capitalized it well enough to achieve that end state. So for us, for the majority of the deals that we invest in and the companies that we work with, we view government as an expansion opportunity market versus a starting point market for those reasons.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts, Sarah, though? You're in this space a lot.
I think the government, in terms of R&D funding, I think the government is a good early first customer for new and emerging technologies. So a good partner when it comes to that. Obviously, on the defense tech side of things, the government is still a very difficult customer to work with. So I think overall the DoD is moving in a direction to allow for more venture-backed emerging and developing technology companies to move into this space and actually get pretty big contracts. But it's been a slow process. It's like what Larsen was talking about. There was the Cold War era of investing very heavily in technology, and then the GWAT era where you had the Last Supper, where there was the consolidation of the defense industry. And now I think what Sham at Palantir calls the first breakfast, where there's this new recognition of China as a strategic competitor and the recognition that there needs to be an opening of the DoD to new and emerging technologies and allowing these companies to grow and build within the defense sector. So I think that's really exciting. But the DoD is definitely a slow-moving entity. So we're getting there, but the ship is turning just.
I love the looks you and Larsen give me when you talk about the DoD being slow.
Well, it's essentially your fault, Andy.
And I would also add too, so our team at Madison Dearborn Technology and Government, we spend time looking at both defense and government-oriented companies, but then also commercial. So we like to think we have a little bit of a unique perspective being deep in both. And it's kind of the less sexy and exciting part of it, but frankly, the DoD I think has gotten a lot better about this in recent years, whether it's what you're doing with Office of Strategic Capital or program offices like DIU that are specifically tailored to working with, commercial companies in a more sort of common commercial kind of manner. But, at the end of the day, there are certain requirements that companies need
Right.
to make sure they're focused on and fulfilling, which sort of make it easier for DoD to contract with them. So obviously, there's a wide gamut of opportunities and program offices and things that companies could be going after. But depending on the type of program, there could be classified elements. You might need to make sure you've got personnel with the necessary security clearances to go after that type of work. It could be as simple as certain programs, particularly if there's an opportunity to scale to a very large level, you got to make sure you have DoD approved accounting systems or, financial system, things of that sort. To Larsen and I were having a conversation about, when you think of the go-to-market side of the world, sort of how do you actually develop business and contract with the DoD? It's a very different motion than the commercial market. And, there's sort of a skill-based side to making sure companies understand how to, even as simple as well, not simple, it's complicated, but how to write proposals effectively to work with the DoD. And so there are a number, and luckily the DoD, I think, is actually pretty good about publishing a lot of this information and trying to make clear as possible sort of what those types of requirements are. But we always feel like it behooves companies to make sure you're being thoughtful about those differences. And just, again, it just makes it easier for the DoD to contract with you versus what it'd be like in a commercial setting.
Yeah, Brandon, I want to go back to you. In 2022, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Bill LaPlante, made a comment that the Ukraine war was not being helped by Silicon Valley and the tech bros. What is your perspective on this?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess the way I would answer it is my interpretation of what Dr. LaPlante was talking about there is, at the end of the day, the DoD has a very, as Larsen said, very large budget, is able to address a bunch of different problems, needs, priorities, et cetera. But it's a fixed budget. It gets appropriated by Congress. Like once the priorities are set and the funding has been allocated, there's not a whole lot of wiggle room. And that again, to tie back to the last question, is obviously a major difference relative to the commercial market. And maybe the way I'd frame it is, whenever we're looking at companies in this sector, we like to think about alignment across, call it three major factors. One is capability, which includes, the people, the technology, et cetera, what solution the company is actually providing. The second is an actual customer or mission need. What actually does the DoD require at a given time, whether near term, medium term, et cetera. And then the last is funding. And, the comment I made before, the DoD is actually pretty good if you do the work at publishing, making clear what their priorities are. There's strategic documents that reside across the DoD. There's agency level. There's a whole bunch of different sources that companies can look to make sure they're really understanding what the on the ground needs are, whether that's, on the enterprise side of the world or the war fighter, or whomever sort of the ultimate end user of the technology is. And then funding can be opaque depending on the type of program you're going after. But, the DoD budget, it's public, it's published. There's a lot of great information there. There's resources like the FYDP, the Future Years Defense Program, which is a multi-year projection of sort of what funding looks like across areas over multiple years. And so there are various, and those are just some examples, there are various resources that companies can look to make sure they're understanding what are the needs and what's the funding. And so I think Dr. LaPlante was probably referring to, like we've met a bunch of companies over the years that might have a fantastic technology, have great people, are very good at explaining why their technology is going to solve a really big problem for the DoD. But then as you dig into it, you learn that, well, that problem either A, might not be a top priority problem for the DoD at that moment, again, whether it's near term or medium term, or B, the DoD just does not have funding to allocate toward that type of a technology to solve that sort of a solution. And so, like there's a term I love called PowerPoint engineering, which is just, companies with things that are with concepts that might be earlier stage and could be really helpful over the long term, but are not necessarily actionable today in addressing the immediate needs. And so, look, not to paint a picture that the DoD is not making big technology bets and wanting to ensure that they're deploying the absolute best technology and capabilities that the U.S. has to offer, because I believe they are. I think we all believe they are. But there's a balance with the reality of what are the, immediate problems that need to be addressed and what are the technologies that are going to best solve those problems today.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, OSC is only investing in enabling technologies, but defense tech specifically has gotten a lot of interest and investment recently. Can you explain why OSC is not investing in defense tech?
Yes. So OSC is investing in the enabling critical technology that will lead into defense tech. We're investing in the upstream components that'll eventually get used by the warfighter. So I used to be a warfighter. Larsen was a warfighter. No one ever told us, or you're never thinking like, hey, I really need the best microelectronics, right?
Yeah.
Like that never came up. There's no program of record for microelectronics, but these are the things that the base components that are absolutely necessary to go into the things that might go into the things that go into the equipment, the capabilities that warfighters need. And, defense tech, it's been great to see the amount of venture capital investment and private equity or growth equity investment that has gone into these companies, because that's absolutely needed for the warfighter to have those capabilities. But we cannot not invest in the enabling technology, because these warfighters will only have those capabilities for so many years if there's no supply chain to keep feeding them. So if you take a look at the amount of venture capital investment that has gone into things, and defense tech is growing, but it's still not at the level of investment in other things. So if you look at like e-commerce, so VC investment in e-commerce is like 2 times what it is to AI autonomy, which is critical tech, 3 times what it is in biotech, critical tech, and 150 times what it is in quantum technology. So we are still, as a venture capital ecosystem in the United States, still investing into those things. And there's good reason for that. It's because, you guys are savvy investors. I don't have to tell this to you, but you invest in things that maybe have, more reasonable risk threshold, aren't super capital intensive, and you might have a quicker chance for liquidity or return. And the problem with that is, while that makes sense from an economic standpoint, but a lot of our investments that we need made into these critical component level technologies are very risky. And not only that, like there's not a lot of comparables to really even determine what should the valuation be and how much risk am I actually taking. So investors stay away from them. They're very capital intensive. Hardware is just capital intensive. And the return profile is very long. And so that's a difficult thing to ask an investor to take that on. And so because of that, OSC exists, again, to invite and empower investors to provide those incentives to make more financial sense for them now to invest in those upstream components, because of that huge gap that is there and will be there. And unless we do something now, those capabilities won't even exist in the hands of the warfighter. So just a quick aside, in 2022, deliveries of the F-35 were halted because it was determined that magnets were being put into a component which was being put into a Honeywell engine that was going into the Lockheed Martin F-35. So we had to stop the delivery of F-35 because we had not invested in the supply chain domestically or nearshorely from a non-adversarial nation for those critical components that went into the magnets, that went into the thing that eventually went into the F-35, the very thing that we were building to counter the adversary that was supplying the component level technology. So it is clear that we need more investment into these areas. We lay this out in our FY24 investment strategy, but our first program is called the Small Business Investment Company Critical Technology Initiative, SBIC CTI. And this program exists so investors can raise a fund, then they can take leverage on that fund in the form of government-backed debt. So now they can double up or even get even more cash on the funds they've already raised. The stipulation is they must invest a portion of the portfolio into these critical technology areas. So we've identified the gap, and we're trying to create a program that incentivizes investors to now invest alongside the government for those technologies.
And after the VCs pay back principal plus interest, they get to keep the extra returns on top of that, correct?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely.
So it's great for other LPs.
It is great. So and because now there's more assets under management, there's more funds that are being deployed. So because of the multiplier effect, the LP should see a significant larger return.
That's great.
Yeah, and I would add even where we sit sort of in the life cycle, if you will, of a company. So call it more mid stage than early stage. Candidly, we've even seen in the last number of years, some of the, I understand OSC is new, but there's program offices like a DIU, a bunch of, relatively new infrastructure focused on, I think Larsen mentioned some of this, focused on these types of companies. And we are seeing the impact of it firsthand in terms of just the number of companies that are out there that are really doing something interesting, innovating, and are primarily interested in this market as a result of programs like yours is fantastic to see. And so real impact pretty quickly.
And a lot of defense tech investors, so I spend a lot of my time talking to dual use or defense tech investors. Once we sort of lay out the OSC strategy, and once we explain how we see critical technologies, a lot of investors, defense, dual use or not, are already doing these investments.
Yeah.
They're already investing in a lot of these areas because it does make good sense to invest in them. We just want to see more of it.
Yeah. Larsen, how does Harpoon think about dual use versus pure play defense tech investing, and when does each approach make sense?
That's a deep question, and I hope I have a good answer. I think maybe before getting into that one, and I promise I will, I'm piggybacking on some of the things that we're talking about capitalizing this ecosystem. You really need a handful of things to make a business or an economy work. You need talent, you need capital to resource that for them to build things, and you need an offtake, aka a market to sell it into.
Yeah.
And what's been very fascinating to me over the past number of years is when I got into Silicon Valley and got into tech investing, investing in national security oriented types of things, which may not be for the warfighter. They may be enterprise oriented. They are critical technology areas that you mentioned here in terms of advanced cyber capabilities to defend us from adversaries, state or otherwise adversarial. But there still wasn't a lot of appetite there due to the confusion largely in the acquisitions landscape of whether there's an offtake or a true market for that. But what has been shown somewhat recently from a startup standpoint, or companies like Anduril, companies like Shield AI, companies like SpaceX, Palantir, Vannevar Labs, and many others who've actually shown that there's an addressable market there, and you can actually sell into Uncle Sam rather effectively. And what's been catalyzed somewhat recently is talent, even better talent, higher horsepower engineers who have specializations in AI, who now have an opportunity to support our country's interests versus going to a social media company, for example, to bring that talent there. So talent is now coming into the market. And the critical piece that I think everybody here is addressing is the funding piece to accelerate that talent into this market. So I think that we are at this really interesting point in time, and we'll see how it progresses over the next decade, where we do have this unique Venn diagram where all three components that are necessary to move us forward as an economy and as a country in these important areas are happening at once. And so to your point, how we think about it is really, that's the groundwork that I think is going on right now that informs how we think about investing in something that's dual use or single purpose to sell to Uncle Sam or the government. To date, I don't think we've done a single deal that is only government use cases. I think that's about to change. I think that we are going to do government only solutions. And it's a common misnomer that people have of us as an organization, or maybe me as an individual, is that I'm a pure government investor, and actually nothing could be further from the case.
Yep.
And the reason why is because, what we talked about recently, the precedents for pure government companies that have 20x multiples on revenue, akin to a software company, is rather low. There's only one that's exited at that, which is Palantir.
Yep.
And so if you're looking at comps or things to inform your investment decisions, you've only got one comp. And so that's really hard to justify an entire strategy behind, although I think there is uniquely merits for that now more than ever, at least in my lifetime. So as a hedge, perhaps, or as a pathway to get there that is, in my opinion, lesser risk, but potentially similar outcome, is looking for those technologies that are going to sell into the enterprise and can get critical mass there, can get $10 or $20 million of revenue, have a repeatable sales motion, And then, okay, now we can actually resource a federal team to understand bid and proposal, capture, compliance, BD, all of these things that are really, really important, but are distinctly different. And the sales cycles are somewhat undependable. Continuing resolutions happen. And so if you're going to capitalize a business and you're up for a contract and there's a CR and you don't know when you're going to actually recognize that opportunity and take receipt of the capital that you thought you were going to get, that could be business breaking as much as it could be business making.
Yeah.
So that's how we think about prioritizing this. And I think now we have, through the OSC's work, your work, and obviously Brandon's work over at Madison Dearborn, I think we have capital that understands this market much more at a more sophisticated level than it probably has in the past number of decades. And I think that we can actually help these companies get to the promised land of serving customers and ultimately exits for investors thereafter.
Yeah. And to the talent piece as well, there's all these great engineers who are exiting Palantir, exiting Anduril, and exiting SpaceX, and creating the next Palantir mafia, where they're all creating their own companies now. They've taken the learnings from their past experience, and now there's more iterations of learning how to sell into the government, how to actually understand this market, and really capitalizing on that for future technology areas as well. I'm curious as well, because Anduril, I believe, was funded in 2017 for the first time, pre-Russian invasion of Ukraine. Those initial investments, from my understanding, were actually quite controversial for a number of firms because there wasn't this big blow up in defense tech yet. Defense tech was not an investable area at that point in time. So I'm curious how you've seen the Russian invasion of Ukraine change the national security investing environment.
I think that it's a tremendous catalyst, but you need to have an opportunity for something to be done about it.
Yeah.
So if Anduril had not existed before that geopolitical catalyst, we may not have that example to point to any longer. We hosted a similar setting as to this, where we had a group of people together and we're talking about these things a couple of weeks ago. And there's been many other catalysts that have occurred. If you think back prior to that, 9/11 was a catalyst. Many companies that otherwise would not have existed in the tech industry, such as General Atomics, probably owe a big portion of their success due to a geopolitical catalyst that was, unfortunate for the United States, obviously. But, the Predator probably wouldn't be as prolific as it is now, and the early innings of autonomy wouldn't be as important as it is now were it not for that tragedy. And subsequently, each generation, it seems like, fortunately, unfortunately, we have these issues. And I think we need to have the technologists and the capability sort of standing by, ready to surge into that demand signal if and when it becomes required. There's a lot of talk about great power competition, what could happen if China moves on Taiwan, so on and so forth. And I think a unique thing that we now are helping to stimulate, and this group is, and others in the room and around the country are helping to stimulate, is let's not just get caught with our pants down. Let's understand what the bleeding edge of technology is and what the future of conflict might be, so that we can potentially deter it and hopefully never have to bring these capabilities online to their fullest extent, but at least we're ready this time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would add to that as well, in terms of impact of what we've all observed in Ukraine on sort of this ecosystem. Maybe I'll hit it though from the DoD side of the world, which is we feel like, and obviously want to get all your perspectives on it. We feel like we have observed over the last few years a pretty massive shift in what I would consider to be sort of the DoD's perspective on what types of technologies are going to be, are today and will continue to be relevant in a near peer environment. So if I go back to probably 2017, 2018 timeframe, which is around the time when the DoD in a really comprehensive way was sort of reorienting away from whether it's global war on terror or non-state actor type threats to sort of the near peer environment. I felt like at the time, almost every conversation we were having, whether it was with companies, whether it was advisors, whether it was with the government, ultimately all ended up centering around the biggest, the best, the most exquisite, often the most expensive technology that we can produce that will be superior to everything in that type of an environment. And what's just been really interesting to observe, and also to see how the world has reacted, is now I think there is a much broader understanding, and that it's led by the DoD's perspective, that the go-forward approach, I mean, those types of exquisite programs are going to continue to be extremely important, are going to continue to get funded, but it probably looks more like a hybrid approach where you have those technologies, but then you also, and I think this gets into the dual use technology theme as well, you then have this whole other area, which are more commercially derived, cost-effective, rapidly produced type capabilities. We've seen a lot more companies focused on ensuring they're developing things, leveraging open source frameworks to sort of add to that modularity and flexibility. And candidly, for all of us up here, I think that's really exciting and impactful because at the end of the day, those really large, exquisite programs, they're large programs, they take many years to develop. There's a lot of different companies that end up getting involved in the production of those, but really the lion's share of the work has to be, out of necessity, performed by the largest contractors, the defense primes, a lot of large players in the sector. Whereas on the other hand, these more commercially derived technologies that are more cost effective, there is a much broader environment of folks out there who are smaller, who can actually solve these needs and provide the technologies that are necessary. And that's obviously, you know, the companies that all of us spend time with. But I also, you know, I don't think it's a self-serving comment or anything like that. Like I think it's better for the DoD as well, right, to have a more robust ecosystem of companies that are actually able to get onto programs of record, larger programs that are really making a difference, going to continue to bring in, you know, more businesses, more capital, more interest, et cetera. So it's actually, I think from our perspectives, pretty interesting how material of a pivot, at least we feel like we've seen, and what the impact has been across the board.
Yeah, I think there's always like the highbrow and the lowbrow systems as well. You're always going to need the exquisite systems, but at the same time, with what we've seen with the Houthis in Yemen, you can't shoot down a $10,000 drone with a $2 million missile and
Exactly.
call that economically responsible. There need to be the lowbrow systems as well, based on the opponent that you're fighting.
The DoD uses this term attritable.
Yep.
So there's a big effort right now to produce systems called attritable mass. But to your point, Brandon, like, yes, the primes have a very specific area that they're filling, and they will always be needed. You know, I would just offer that, you know, you guys probably see this from your lens. You don't need to be a direct seller to the government to be a venture-backable company. You can actually be a really great company and be a subcontractor or tier 2 supplier to the primes that are selling to the DoD.
Yep.
And from an OSC perspective, that is something we get really excited about, because those are the types of companies, you know, we want to see more investment into. Those are the enabling type technologies, the upstream type technologies that would then sell, you know, a piece of equipment that would go into a system that would then be bought by a prime that would be sold to the government. And so, you know, I love the dual use government only debate. I love the exquisite versus attritable system debate. To your point, it's all necessary. And, you know, right now we're really excited to see investment going more towards the upstream component level enabling tech.
Yeah. Brandon, I want to touch on a little bit about like exit opportunities in this space, because there's been high levels of venture investment into the defense sector, but these companies need to find exits at some point. And some will IPO, but vast majority will not. So how do you expect the M&A market to look like in aerospace and defense moving forward?
So it's a great question. So I think first I'll say, as we've all mentioned, that on the supply side, call it the companies that are entering this ecosystem, which is heavily being fueled by what all of you are doing, and sort of bringing in those minds that are doing something innovative and different, but are now interested in being focused on this ecosystem. That's only going to continue to improve, I think, the broader sort of M&A market and sort of range of options that companies will have to them. So that's kind of as we go forward. But at least for the current landscape, you know, from our perspective, we've always thought about it that I think it's important for folks to understand, you know, who might not be focused on this market today, that there really is a robust, you know, group of types of alternatives out there for companies as you continue to scale. And so on the one hand, for companies that achieve a certain level of scale, I don't know what the exact number is, but call it in the hundreds of millions of dollars of value up to maybe several billion. There is a large group of, whether it's the primes or there's other publicly traded large government, we call them the government services contractors, who are also heavily investing in technology. There are some large private companies out there who for a very long time have been very public about the fact that they look to M&A acquisitions as a very important tool to augment their own innovation and organic growth profile. They're very public about that. Not only that, a lot of these companies will be transparent about what amount of capital they're looking to deploy in M&A and what specific sectors they're focused in. So we have always felt like for that alternative, there's a great, well-capitalized, robust group of companies that, as companies scale, they can look to as potential, to use your term, exit options as they grow. You mentioned IPO, that we've seen a number of defense technology companies that have performed incredibly well in the public markets. We've seen some that have been on the other side of the spectrum, and so every company is different, but IPO is absolutely an option. And with what you guys are doing in the earlier stage, our view is that's going to continue to increase as more investors get focused on this ecosystem. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention too, obviously, that you got the private equity firms, which I think of us as kind of filling that mid part of the cycle, where you have companies that are starting to emerge from, call it, more developmental type programs. Maybe they've been operating under small business set aside, where the Small Business Administration is focused, small business set aside type programs, and they're looking to transition into the more traditional program offices, looking for program of record opportunities. And there are a whole bunch of different types of private equity firms that, along the spectrum of $50 to $100 million of value, maybe smaller, up to several $1 billion of value, are constantly investing in or exiting from investments in that size range. And so plus, of course, I think, as we've talked about, the VC landscape will continue to expand. So I think the message is that this is a fantastic market from a program and opportunity perspective for companies. You're serving the mission. You can build real companies of consequence that are doing incredible things technologically, but then also on the capital side, which I think a lot of people probably don't fully appreciate, there actually is this really robust sort of, I keep using the word, but ecosystem of types of companies or investors out there.
Yeah. In the IPO market, I know that most defense companies trade at a 1 to 2 times revenue multiple. I assume that a large part of that is based off of previous historic cost plus contracting, but there is a little bit of a move into fixed price contracting and potentially higher margins within that ecosystem. I'm curious your guys' thoughts when it comes to future IPOs of defense tech companies. What multiple do you think they will be allowed to trade at in the public markets?
I think Brandon's smarter on this, so I'll go first, so I don't have to go after him. But
crystal ball.
Yeah, exactly. I think it does come down to the fundamentals of the business, and it's something in venture land. A lot of times at the stage that we're investing, we're very hopeful that the business fundamentals will get there over time. At the stage that we invest a lot, it's a few founders, a technology concept, a market concept, and that's it. And it's our job to find those people and to be convinced by them of when this could be something that's truly special. But whether or not they're going to build a company of consequence with significant margins that leads to a fundamentally valuable business is yet to be determined.
Yeah.
And so if you have a business, there's different types of revenue. And if you have a business where you spend $100 to make $100, it's not going to be very valuable for somebody else to acquire. The public markets are very sophisticated. You have lots of people looking at that, looking for an edge. You have long, people who are long, people who are short. You have a whole bunch of financial instruments that are going to go through your financials with a very fine-tooth comb. And so I think it is extremely important to give yourself that wiggle room and to build a capability that is built, at least in part, with software style margins, so that you can have 70+% gross margins on the business because that business will fundamentally be more valuable than something that's single-digit margins. And historically, through cost-plus contracts, that's essentially what you get. And if you show me the incentive, I'll show you the behavior. And the incentive that the government has created, probably accidentally, with good intentions, actually, but a negative byproduct is traditional contractors will maximize how much they are saying something costs so that they can get their 7% margin on a larger volume of capital flow. But that doesn't mean that the business itself is more valuable. So what we would like to find is the opposite of that, where that margin profile is inverted, but it is extremely hard in programs that still require cost plus accounting.
So I agree with a lot of that. I would say there are a bunch of different examples out there, but if you focus on cost plus for a minute, I completely agree with everything you said. However, we have seen it in the right circumstances be an important tool in order to get companies to be willing to work on something that is very long dated. The ultimate cost profile is unclear. It's not exactly sure how many different iterations you're going to have to go through to get to the final product that the customer then really wants to buy at a production type level. And so we've seen it used as an effective contracting, style in that regard, but absolutely completely agree with everything you're saying. And then, as we're talking about using more commercially derived technologies, dual use technologies, there is a part of the federal acquisition regulation, which is focused on Part 12, which is focused on procuring commercial items, which is a specific set of regulations that govern what a transaction looks like when a company is selling a commercial product into the government. And those are situations where the government is frankly happy to say, hey, this is a pre-existing product, you're selling it in a commercial manner, here's the price, we'll pay you on a fixed price basis. And you have a lot of companies out there that could be earning pretty healthy margin profiles using sort of that specific part of the FAR. And it's great business for the government because a lot of times those commercially derived products are actually more cost effective than entering into some sort of a long-term cost plus contract that's going to take a very long time. So I think we will continue to see more and more companies that are selling the government solutions actually in a more cost effective way, yet at the same time are earning better margin profiles than you've seen over prior years. And in terms of valuations going public, I mean, I'm probably boring, but we generally in our world are much more focused on profitability, not in terms of margin profile, but the actual dollars of profit that a company is generating. We're growth oriented. We're not trying to, reduce costs to increase profit that way. It's all about investing in innovation. But at the end of the day, we like to know that companies are sort of earning enough to really carry their own weight and are generating real profit that they can use to reinvest in capabilities or what have you. And so when we think about companies in terms of valuations, whether they're public or private companies, that's usually the basis we're looking at. And again, it heavily varies, depends on what the company's doing and what the growth trajectory is, all sorts of things. And Larsen touched on them, but we do increasingly see very healthy valuations in the public market for companies that are sort of meeting, the types of metrics that we're generally focused on.
That's great. Andy, I want to go international again. So we're focused on the US, but what do you see from China and other players regarding the role of private capital, regarding the role of private capital is having on their national defense strategies?
Yeah, we like to say at OSC that we invite and empower in the United States where our adversaries coerce and control. So the United States, we benefit from this amazing free market and democratic values, but that's not the case in other adversarial nations. And so, imagine, for instance, say Google was in an adversarial nation, and imagine the state being able to tell Google employees to work over the weekend to develop a product or a piece of software that the state needed to happen for their national security. It doesn't happen in the United States. It happens in the adversarial nations. In fact, for Google 6 years ago, employees walked out because they did not want to work on a government project. In our adversarial nations, there is no clear divide between public-private partnerships. And that's what we're here to really talk about, is these amazing partnerships that we have and we can really benefit from. In other countries, it's all one and the same. And that stifles innovation. On the other side of that coin, adversarial nations can subsidize funding into a lot of these critical technologies that we, keep to have discussing on this panel, which puts us in a free market at a disadvantage. And so back to Larsen's point about incentives, where we sit at OSC is to find ways through a free market system to incentivize investors using government tools, these financial tools, credit-based tools, what we call strategic capital, to incentivize investors to invest in, again, the things that matter for our national security because of the nature of how our system is set up versus the adversarial nations.
Yeah. And are you planning on, is OSC planning on working with any allies and partners when it comes to strategic capital?
Yes, absolutely. So we announced the investment strategy today. In that is our first program activity. I highlight the word first, which is the SBIC CT initiative. We have a number of other program activities that we'll begin to release out, and we'll announce those publicly. One of them is a play in the international environment. We look forward to talking about that when that one is released.
That's great. So for everyone on the panel, if you could wave a magic wand and change one structural thing about the defense innovation sector, what would it be? We can start on either end.
Larson's closest to you.
I know, I figured I'd get tagged with this one. The magic wand is probably just that magic, because I don't know how practical it would be. I think that the government, there's a lot of misconceptions, in my opinion, about government customers. One of which is the transparency or opacity about what it's like to work with them. And it exists in certain channels and certain programs, et cetera. But where else are you going to get a large scale customer that literally provides you what they're looking for very specifically, how much money they have for it today, how much money they plan to spend on it in 5 years? It is a huge advantage, if you think about it that way, from a strategy standpoint for a company to develop something towards that. The challenge is, across many of the challenges, is that everybody knows it. The defense primes know it, other people know it, and they can sort of compete and angle and all of these things to try and get it. And a startup oftentimes is not well situated to play that game. Because usually if you're a startup in the normal commercial market, you have to focus on one thing and do it really, really well, or else the competitive pressures are such that you're just never going to bring it to market. In the defense sector, the large companies have many different products and product lines, so they can diversify their risk aperture. So I would say my magic wand would probably be more responsive pools of customer capital that aren't one-time shot infusions. The SBIR program, I think, is a one-shot infusion type of program. And there's a lot of conversations about the Valley of Death and how hard it is to go from that R&D capital, the SBIR shot of sugar, into something that actually is nourishment from a business standpoint. I don't know how to do that, but if I could wave a magic wand and make that easier on business and the government, that would be it. And the reason why is not purely from a capitalist standpoint, although that's certainly part of it, but we are in this era of accelerating technology development. And I don't think that we're actually, from a government standpoint, in this era of accelerating technology adoption that matches the development that's going on. And there was once upon a time that if you did a software update every 6 months, like, it would be okay. But now commercially, everyone sees it on their Android and iPhones. It's instantaneous, real-time development of product upgrades, security patches, so on and so forth, with no lag, no wait time. What we still have in the government is lag and wait time to get that best technology instantaneously on a continuous development, continuous delivery cycle that the commercial enterprise has, but Uncle Sam does not have right now. And so I think we do need to figure out how to match these things. I don't know how to do it, but I think it will be much more effective as a country, technologically, geopolitically, if we can figure that middle piece out.
Yeah.
You want to go next?
I want you to go next, but I want you to also touch on what do you wish the VC and the startup and commercial sector would know about government or should know about government as well?
I'll start with that one. There's been a massive change. So, I was in the operational world for a number of years, and about 5 years ago, I left the operational world to enter this world. And just that short amount of time, the last 5 years, I've already seen like this amazing change has already happened. And so, I guess the theme of my comments is like, let's just keep going. There's so many more interested VCs in this space, so many more companies in the space, kind of back to your previous comments, Larsen, about the conflict in Ukraine. There has been just this influx of talent and capital into defense technology. So I like that to keep going with some very educated investments and very, educated understanding of who am I selling to and what products does the warfighter want versus what products will the government buy, because those are two different things. And just having companies and investors continuing to educate themselves on that process and what is actually the way to sell into the government, I'd like to see that keep growing to make sure that we're not selling false hope to a lot of investors, LPs, or companies themselves. As far as my magic wand, again, we're talking about public-private partnerships, and that's sort of been my passion in my professional life, is finding ways to make this happen more and to add more structure around finding ways to collaborate with private investors from a public perspective because of how liquid and strong and powerful the U.S. Markets are. I mean, we're a global leader in VC and PE. Almost half the entire globe comes to the United States, and this is a massive national security advantage, our economy, and finding ways to leverage that through very clearly laid out public-private partnerships is the key. We are trying to do this at OSC through our first program activity, the SBIC Critical Technology Initiative, where as a investor right now, you can apply to this program, raise a fund, and then take leverage on that fund. Right now, you can apply to the program, you go to our website, the applications close for this cohort at the end of the month. So I invite you to definitely check that out. Finding more ways to do that. I wish I could use a magic wand to that. Something I always hear from investors is they want to see more of a demand signal from the Department of Defense. And if we, the department, could do that more, I think that would be another magic wand action I would take. We're trying to do this at OSC through prioritized industries that we've laid out again in our investment strategy, which we just released today.
Awesome.
So mine Larsen half stole, which is great because I can make it quick because I know we're getting low on time anyway. So like Larsen, as I think about the conversation we had here today, right? We've had talked a lot about the earlier stage part of the funnel and how DoD has been very thoughtful around program offices like a DIU, the way it actually contracts with earlier stage companies. How do you get capital to these types of companies that might not already be in the ecosystem? But, Larsen used the term Valley of Death, and you can call it whatever, however you'd like. But it really, as I think about sort of where my, attention turns and with the magic wand, would love now from a DoD perspective, the focus to start to turn there as well. Now that we've got great infrastructure on the earlier part of the life cycle is really that mid part of the maturation. And, we end up meeting a lot of companies that have done great things under the small business type programs, but it becomes very challenging once you try to transition into larger program offices, programs of record. As one example, actually, interestingly, outside of DoD, we look at some companies in the federal civilian world as well. And you've actually seen some federal civilian agencies put out procurements that are called emerging large business, which is, not focused on the small end of the spectrum, but also it's not only looking at the largest companies, and something like that, I think, could be really fantastic to provide more of a pathway for these companies to continue to scale.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because there's the capital side of the equation, but there's also the procurement side of the equation. And what I've seen, at least, is 10 years ago there was no front door to the DoD, and now there's almost too many front doors. There's 10 front doors, and you need to know exactly who to go to and who actually has money and authorities to be able to help you in that front door. So I think that would be my magic wand, where I might consolidate those organizations and make sure that you have a couple who really have money and authorities to be able to help startups get into the front door of the DoD.
The last thing I would say about a lot of this is that there is some, I think, rightly earned stereotypes about the government being a challenging customer. But at the end of the day, all customers are challenging.
It's true.
Your job as a startup founder and a startup company is to satisfy your customer, to make them elated with the product that you're delivering. And so my thoughts on this are when people say, oh, the government's too hard. It's like, have you met a customer segment where it's been too easy?
Yeah.
I don't think that that really exists. And so I think we have a real opportunity here to do something special. And I'm really happy to be up here with all of you.
Well,
Well
thank
said.
you all for joining us today, and go Cardinal.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.